people in this church community who can tell you as much, if not more, about the sermon today, the subject. It's caring for the carers. I've had this topic on my mind for probably up to about 3 months now, a time 3 months ago when my mother-in-law died. My wife and I cared daily as she struggled to live independently for a long period of time before she needed the professional help a nursing home provides. She died quite suddenly at the age of 97 and went to her eternal home, as I say, about 3 months ago. When I was still in my 20s, after my mother had died of cancer, I became a carer, almost by default, for my blind diabetic grandmother until the first of her 2 amputations when she needed to go into a nursing home. But there are many other people, ourselves perhaps, or people we know, who have cared for relatives or others over a long period of time. I'm going to ask in our prayers later if we'll remember a couple from my own church in Tyler's Green, Chris and Dennis. Now, Dennis has had cancer for a long time, and recently things took a turn for the worse, but they went off to the Lake District for a holiday and then down to Mansfield, where Chris's mother lives. Now, again, they've got the same difficulty to deal with that we had, of a mother seeking to live independently. Chris's brother was there a lot of the time, but recently he's been on holiday, and so they had to come down to spend a week in Mansfield. Not that they're not there most weekends, that they're not in church anyway, but they came down to Mansfield. And during the time there, Chris's husband Dennis was taken ill and is in hospital. So Chris has got a double caring situation. There's her mother and there is her husband. And the 2 people she needs to care for most are separated by a considerable distance, which has its own logistical situation and problems. So setting the scene for this theme, caring for the carers, I'm going to take something which is not from the readings that we heard this morning. It comes from Luke's Gospel and is that heartfelt statement contained in the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. The circumstances were that his friend Lazarus had died. Was Jesus weeping because his friend had died, or was he weeping out of compassion for the sisters of Lazarus, Mary and Martha? The whole of the 2 sisters and the brother were very close to Jesus. That's clear from several instances that we read about in the Gospels. And Mary and Martha had cared for Lazarus during his life, and especially so during his illness. So I wonder what his priority was then in terms of who he was weeping for. It's a question we can perhaps ponder in our minds, but it does raise in my mind the possibility that Jesus was very aware of the love and responsibilities, the stresses and strains of caring for another person who is gravely ill. The fact that Jesus went on to raise Lazarus from the dead does not detract from the compassion he felt as he was faced with the reality of the situation. Even when facing the cross, you will remember, Jesus made arrangements for the ongoing care of his own mother. Bear that thought in mind as we explore the powerful verses 40 to 42 at the end of that lovely reading we heard earlier from Matthew's Gospel, including how Jesus' teaching worked out in the life of a particular church. And we'll end with a look at the place of prayer in caring for the carers. Those verses at the end of that reading speak of Christian hospitality, But there is another message which speaks of those who care for others, and also about how we care for them. There was a strong belief among the Jews that to receive someone's envoy, messenger, or ambassador was the same as receiving the person who sent them. So giving a warm welcome to the children of your friend was a way of showing your love for that friend. Welcoming and care were interwoven. You could not have one without the other. Jesus uses that belief in the gospel reading today when he says to his disciples, "Whoever welcomes you welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me." Who sent Jesus into the world? Well, God, his Father, did. So if you welcome Jesus into your life as your friend, you have found a place in your heart for God. And by implication, if you welcome others whom Jesus sends, you are welcoming Jesus. We think of carers most easily in terms of health or age, but there are less obvious ways in which people who help others show a different kind of care and affection and affinity. Herbert G. wrote short stories about people who lived on the Yorkshire coast. In one, he tells the tale of a young lad from a poor background who taught himself to read and write. His chief helper and teacher was the local cobbler. How many years is it, I wonder, since you've heard that word, cobbler? Well, he was the one who helped him. He was an intelligent and widely read man who'd also had a hard beginning to life and had never achieved his ambition of becoming a preacher. But when his pupil made it and was ordained, the cobbler spoke to him like this: "It was always my desire to be a minister of the gospel, but the circumstances of my life made that impossible. But you are achieving what was closed to me. And I want you to promise me one thing. I want you to let me make and cobble your shoes for nothing. And I want you to wear them in the pulpit when you preach. And then I'll feel you are preaching the gospel that I always wanted to preach, standing in my shoes." Now I expect that was a valuable gesture in itself. Even more so today. I talked about how the word cobbler has almost gone out of existence, but there was one on television recently showing how she made her shoes. Wonderful if you've got £7,500 to spend on a pair. I wonder what it meant to that cobbler to make the shoes for that young man. A great sacrifice, no doubt. That cobbler, by his encouragement, had made it possible for the young lad to become a minister, and the old man's reward would one day be the same as that of his pupils. My father-in-law was a Methodist minister. Being a minister of God is not easy. I remember at a time when I began preaching and lots of people were encouraging me to train for ordination. His advice to me was advice that he'd been given himself as a young man. If you can stay out of the ministry, you must do so. In other words, you've got to be absolutely 100% convinced that that's what God is calling you to do. That's why he had a dog collar around his neck and I don't. Because all sorts of things go through the mind of you when you're young, newly married, beginning a family, starting a career, and all kinds of things. And you think, I can't work all this out. And you put it to one side, and then you come to the conclusion that the advice I was given was right. People come into the work with high ideals about how they will build a loving, growing and vibrant community. And with the church filled every week with people of all ages, where everyone is equal because we are all equal before God. But for this to be possible, some things have to change. And many people resent any form of change. There's a great deal of thought going on at Union Baptist Church in High Wycombe this morning. After goodness knows how many decades or more than a century, they've got a proposal in hand that they're talking about this morning as part of their service to modernise their church, leaving the shell much as it is here, but removing the pews and bringing in seats to give a more flexible sort of way of working. And why that's such a big consideration in the Baptist church, unlike the church that I come from, the Methodist church, they have to raise every single penny themselves in their local community. They've got no grant-making facility nationally in order to be able to part-fund it. And so there are big discussions, and today is the day that they're wanting the pledges to be in to see how far they can go. How much do you value change? How much do you see it as a way forward? How much do you see it as a way, in their case, of making the church more welcoming? How difficult it is in those circumstances or circumstances like it, if the minister does not feel that he is supported, or in their case, a team of ministers does not feel that they're supported by their local congregation. During my research for today, I read of a vicar and his wife who were struggling with a small congregation who wanted everything to stay as it used to be. And then their young son was killed in a tragic road accident. The church people swung into action, took over the administration of the parish, which isn't that easy to do in the Anglican church, but they did it. They spoke words of quiet sympathy. They left cooked meals on their doorstep to lessen the burden, and praised the bereaved couple for what they were trying to do. Soon the feeling in the church itself changed, and new people attending the services for the first time were conscious of an atmosphere of love among the people of the church, because they had reversed roles, and the people were caring for their carer, the minister. Within a year, the congregation of that church had doubled. Jesus said that if we welcome God's messengers as we are welcoming God himself, then God will dwell in our hearts. As the poet Robert Browning put it, all service ranks the same with God. So caring for the carers is not only about those who care for the elderly or the sick. The vicar cared for his people, and when they in turn responded to his need and cared for him because it was needed, it became a time of growth and trust and love for the people of his church. I have experienced something very similar to this when I first transferred from the Church of England into the Methodist Church. Soon after, circumstances left us without a minister for almost a year. Now that may not be a particularly unusual thing in the United Reformed Church, but in the Methodist Church, where everybody changes seats on the 1st of September, and you're never left without a minister, it's a very different scenario. Well, we were part of a group of churches, a circuit as we call it. There were other ministers around, but he was not the minister of our church. And there were 250 worshippers at that church at that time. And when things got sorted out, we actually ended up with 3 ministers, but that's another story. But the congregation was left with the task of taking that church forward. It was a time when many said they experienced spiritual growth, that the love and trust between individuals overcame perceived differences. And the new minister, the following September, inherited a church where the members had learned to care for one another and who were able to embrace into their care the new minister who had come to care for us all. Now, just for the avoidance of confusion, not every Methodist minister moves every 1st of September. They're usually there for at least 5 years and maybe longer if the people want to keep the minister for longer, but that's the way it goes. To be welcoming is to be willing to accept change. It is welcoming in the stranger in order for their story to become our own. Jesus said, anyone who welcomes you welcomes me. Are we practicing that kind of welcoming? Jesus is talking about here. This type that opens up to the transformation of people, to the transformation of ourselves, and for us to adopt that welcoming approach to the people we embrace in our lives. When we see a family with a special needs child, or a young man seeking a closer walk with God, or someone who is seeking to cope with a lifelong partner who is now suffering the effects of dementia, and we truly care for them in our church family of faith and support them, not only by our prayers but in our actions in our lives. When we do these things, we are welcoming God. When we move beyond a friendly greeting and welcome them into every aspect of what it means to be part of this community and show our acceptance by caring for them as they care for others, we welcome Jesus into our lives. It is then that we are able to say with all honesty and truth, you are welcome, you are loved, you are cared for by us and by our Heavenly Father. So how does prayer fit into all this? Why do we pray for others, as we will be shortly? We pray for others out of compassion for them. We pray for others in order to change them. We pray for others because others ask us to pray. We pray for others because we are helpless, but God is not. We pray for others because we can also benefit when God answers our prayers for others, because so often God shows us that we're part of the answer to that prayer ourselves. But best of all, God commands that we declare his greatness and goodness through our lives. And praying for others is something we can all do, including praying for all carers, for their needs and circumstances. And that's something we will be doing in our prayers of intercession after our next hymn. We're going to sing that hymn now.